The Great London Beer Flood of 1814. When a tsunami of beer killed 8 people and drowned half of London, imagine being crushed to death by a 15-foot wall of beer. On October 17, 1814, at 5:30 p.m. on a quiet Monday evening in London, that nightmare became reality for 8 people when 388,000 gallons of porter beer exploded from a massive brewery vat, creating Britain's most bizarre natural disaster. The Great London Beer Flood swept through the slums of St. Giles like a boozy tsunami, demolishing houses, trapping families, and turning rescue operations into the world's strangest drinking party. This is the story of how London literally drowned in its own favorite beverage, and how some residents tried to drink their way out of the disaster. Chapter 1. The Brewing Empire, London, 1814. October 17, 1814. London was booming with over 1 million thirsty residents addicted to porter beer, a dark, strong ale that had become the working-class obsession. At the heart of this beer empire stood Meux and Company Brewery on Tottenham Court Road, home to the world's most massive brewing equipment. The crown jewel was vat number 20, a wooden monster 22 feet high and 60 feet across, held together by 29 iron hoops weighing 700 pounds each. When full, it contained 388,000 gallons of porter, enough beer to fill half an Olympic pool or give every person in London a third of a gallon each. The vat sat dangerously close to St. Giles, London's most notorious slum known as the Rookery. Over 50,000 of London's poorest residents were crammed into basement cellars and crumbling tenements just yards from this liquid time bomb. Chapter 2. The Warning Signs, 5:25 p.m. George Crick, a barrel maker with 12 years' experience, noticed something terrifying about vat number 20 that Monday evening. One of the massive iron hoops had begun bulging outward, accompanied by an ominous groaning sound like a ship's hull under stress. Dark porter beer was seeping through cracks in the splintering wood. Crick called his supervisor, William Reed, who examined the 700-pound iron hoop, now visibly straining against nearly 400,000 gallons of pressurized beer. "Should we empty it?" Crick asked. "It's done this before," Reed replied fatally. "We'll check it tomorrow morning." Neither man understood that years of expansion and contraction had fatally weakened the wooden staves, and those iron hoops were the only thing preventing catastrophic failure. Chapter 3. The Great Rupture, 5:30 p.m. At exactly 5:30 p.m., vat number 20 exploded with a sound witnesses described as thunder mixed with the screaming of demons. The massive iron hoop snapped like a cannon shot, launching 700 pounds of metal across the brewery floor. The wooden staves blew outward like flower petals, releasing 388,000 gallons of beer in a single devastating wave. George Crick was instantly swept up and killed, the first victim of the Great London Beer Flood. But the disaster was just beginning. The initial wave stood 15 feet high and moved at 30 miles per hour, crashing through brewery walls like paper. The explosion's force ruptured 2 other vats, adding another 60,000 gallons to the flood. Nearly 450,000 gallons of beer were now racing toward the crowded slums like a brown, foamy tsunami of death. Chapter 4. Death in the Streets. The beer tsunami burst into Great Russell Street, still 8 feet high when it hit the first tenements. 14-year-old Eleanor Cooper was helping her mother with laundry in their basement flat when their window exploded inward and beer poured in like a waterfall. The basement flat became a death trap. The pressure blew out foundation walls, collapsing the entire 4-story building into a beer-filled crater. Eleanor Cooper and 12 other residents were trapped in a tomb of rubble and porter. At the Tavistock Arms pub, customers were drinking peacefully when the beer tsunami arrived. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. People drowning in beer inside a pub. 2 customers, John Parsons and William Bennett, were crushed by furniture swept up in the current. The most tragic death was 4-year-old Anne Saville, the barman's daughter, who was playing in the pub's cellar when the flood poured down the stairs. Her father found her body floating among the beer barrels, a child killed by the very product that provided her family's livelihood. Chapter 5. The Bizarre Rescue Operations. As rescue teams arrived, they encountered one of the most surreal scenes in disaster history. Hundreds of residents wading through knee-deep beer with buckets, pots, and even hats, desperately collecting free alcohol while people were still trapped in collapsed buildings. Fire Chief Samuel Matthews faced an unprecedented challenge. His men needed to pump beer out of buildings to search for survivors, but crowds kept interfering with rescue efforts. "Clear the area!" Matthews shouted at men literally lying on their stomachs, trying to drink directly from puddles of beer mixed with sewage and debris. "It's free beer," one replied, his face covered in brown foam. "When will we ever get another chance?" Police had to form human barriers to keep eager drinkers away from collapsed buildings. Some residents became so intoxicated from flood beer that they passed out in the streets, hampering rescue efforts further. Dr. William Harvey reported treating patients with broken bones who were too drunk to feel pain. Chapter 6: The Legal Reckoning. The coroner's inquest began 3 days later, facing an unprecedented question. Could anyone be held responsible for deaths caused by drowning in beer? British law had never contemplated such a scenario. Brewery owner Henry Meux claimed it was an act of God. No human engineering could have predicted such failure. But Supervisor William Reed broke down under oath, admitting he had seen the bulging hoop hours before, but decided to wait until the next day to fix it. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a shocking verdict: death by visitation of God. No criminal charges were filed. However, civil lawsuits were different. Families sued for wrongful death, and hundreds demanded compensation for destroyed homes. Public opinion turned against Meux when newspapers contrasted the company's enormous profits with St. Giles residents' desperate poverty. Eventually, Meux settled out of court, paying $23,000, equivalent to $1.8 million today, one of the largest disaster settlements in British legal history. Chapter 7: The Science Behind the Disaster. Modern materials science explains the mystery. Wooden vat staves undergo constant stress cycles from temperature changes and liquid pressure, creating microscopic cracks that weaken structural integrity over time. The iron hoops, repeatedly heated and cooled, had become brittle. Dr. James Whitworth, studying the disaster in 1987, concluded, "It was a perfect storm of material fatigue. The wood was weakened by stress, the iron had become brittle, and the vat was at maximum capacity. Any one factor alone might not have caused failure, but combined, they created a ticking time bomb." The disaster led to new regulations requiring steel reinforcement and pressure relief valves. By 1820, no British brewery could construct wooden vats larger than 1,000 gallons without government inspection. Chapter 8: The Cultural Impact and Survivors. The flood became instant legend, but often as dark comedy rather than tragedy. Music halls featured songs about the Great Beer Tsunami, and street vendors sold commemorative prints of people swimming in beer. But the disaster also exposed shocking poverty in St. Giles, contributing to early social reform movements. William Wilberforce wrote, "If people can be drowned by beer in their own homes, our society has failed them fundamentally." Survivors used their stories to advocate for change. Mary Cooper, who lost daughter Eleanor, opened a boarding house and campaigned for brewery safety. William Reed became a Methodist preacher speaking about industrial safety. Thomas Saville used his settlement to open the Anne Saville Memorial School for poor children. Chapter 9: The Lasting Legacy. The Great London Beer Flood remains unique in disaster history, the only known beer tsunami to cause multiple urban deaths. The Meux Brewery site is now the Dominion Theatre, with only a small plaque commemorating the tragedy. St. Giles was gradually rebuilt with wider streets and better housing, though poverty persisted. The disaster influenced brewing technology worldwide. American breweries adopted steel reinforcement much earlier, after learning from London's tragedy. The phrase "drowning your sorrows" took on new meaning in London pubs, and bartenders would joke about flooding customers with beer while maintaining underlying awareness of when that metaphor became deadly reality. The Great London Beer Flood teaches us that tragedy and absurdity often intertwine in disturbing ways. While 8 people died horrible deaths, their neighbors tried to drink the disaster away. not from callousness, but from desperate poverty that made free beer seem worth risking their lives for. It reminds us that industrial progress without proper safety measures inevitably leads to catastrophe. The Meux Brewery was a marvel built with outdated technology handling modern volumes in a residential area, a combination bound to be deadly. Most importantly, it shows how disasters reveal society's true character. The flood exposed shocking poverty, where people lived in such desperate conditions that beer seemed more valuable than safety, while also showing working-class resilience and community solidarity. The next time someone jokes about drowning in beer, remember Eleanor Cooper, Little Anne Saville, Hannah Banfield, and the others who died that October evening. Behind history's most absurd headlines are often very real human tragedies that teach us important lessons about how societies treat their most vulnerable. Next episode, The Dancing Plague of 1518, when 400 people literally danced themselves to death in medieval Strasbourg. On July 14, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophea began dancing frantically in the streets of Strasbourg, France, and couldn't stop. Within days, dozens had joined her compulsive dancing. Within a month, 400 people were locked in a mysterious dance marathon that killed approximately 15 people from exhaustion, heart attacks, and strokes. City officials hired musicians and built dance stages, thinking more dancing would cure the afflicted. Instead, it made the plague worse. Was it mass hysteria, ergot poisoning from contaminated bread, or something even stranger? The dancing plague remains one of history's most bizarre medical mysteries, a time when an entire city lost control of their bodies and danced toward death.